Welcome to African Voices Abroad on CBI Community Network. My name is Larry Omotosho. This program provides opportunity for Africans in the diaspora to hear their views on topical issues of African interest. Please don't forget to share this program, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Instagram. The month of February is a special month to African Americans in the United States. It is called the Black History Month. Black History Month. Apart from celebrating the achievements and contributions of people of African descent to the United States, Black History Month is not without some kind of symbolic connotations. And this is why we are here today to discuss Black History Month, what it is and what it is not. Our guest on the program is a professor of social work, an adjunct professor of African studies at the Indiana University, IUPUI. His academic work are enough to show his passion for African heritage. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me as I welcome Dr. Eric KYERE. You are welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
I will want to start by wanting to know, I've read so much about you, I've seen some of your work. What are some of the profile information that you want us to know about you, your background and all that?
Well, so thank you for having me here. It's wonderful. Like you said, my name is Eric KYERE. I am assistant professor in the School of Social Work and an adjunct professor within the Africana Studies Department on the IUPUI campus here in Indianapolis. So for a bit about me, I'm from Ghana. I've been here, I think I came here since 2008. I came here for my master's in social work, and then after that, I went ahead and got a PhD at the Kutztown University of Pennsylvania and the University of Pittsburgh. But as you said, my research focuses on issues about race and then the people of the African descent. So both Africans on the continent and then the African Americans in Africans, recent African immigrant to the U.S. here. A little bit about how I came to do all that I do. Prior to me coming here, I had no idea. And it wasn't like I didn't know it, but I think because of the kind of the socialization that we went through in Africa, educationally and home-wise and other kinds of stuff, this was not something that I really gave much attention to. So when I came here right after my master's, even throughout my master's, I never gave a thought to me to think about doing work on race and stuff. But after my master's, I worked in school. I work in predominantly white school as a behavior specialist consultant and then in mobile therapy. So I work with mostly white family because of where I lived at the time in Pennsylvania. And so in the schools, there were a lot of issues where most of all of these predominantly white schools with white kids and stuff. So there were some good resource-wise, the schools were well resourced and the kids were well taken care of. Then after a while, I moved to Philadelphia. So there I began, I was working in the child welfare system, but I also had some of the children that I was working with in the schools. And then later on to working in the schools there. So then I went to the school, some of the schools in Philadelphia. So that was actually the first time I began to have clients who were Black and African Americans. And so I'll go to these schools in Philadelphia, and the experience was completely different from what I observed whilst I was in Lebanon specifically, and then some of the other part in Kutztown, the surrounding cities. So I began I didn't have really the context why it is so. But I think one of the things that I observe, in particular with the Philadelphia schools, sometimes some of these children, all of them black kids, and sometimes I will hear some teachers and sometimes even counselors or my colleagues, social workers, and some of them were even from Africa. They can tell me, oh, the number of these some of these children. They can say, oh, this child by the time he is 15 years, he's going to go to jail. And
Wow.
they can tell me who in this child family is about to come out of jail, who is likely to go next, and all of those things. And it broke my heart. I just it didn't settle well with me. So all of these things at this point, I still had no clue about the context and stuff. So I began along the line. I got into study another master's in public administration, and so there I had the opportunity to evaluate a program for one of the YMCs in Berks County. And so I remember when I got there, I met with the director, and the director said that they were preparing low income families and minority families to get your children ready for school to meet the achievement gap. So that was actually the first time I heard the term. I didn't know it had been there for so long. And so I said, well, for me, what I've observed in the schools that I have worked, I will not call that achievement gap, because the achievement gap looks like these kids intellectually are not doing well, so they are trailing white kids, like black and brown kids. And so to me, given what I was observing in those two schools, white schools and and then the black schools in the Philadelphia, it was like kind of, if you check your output and you connect it to the input, that was exactly true. So the input in terms of the resources and the quality of the education and the care and the support that these kids were having, you wouldn't expect any other thing different. And so I didn't see that as an achievement gap. So with that, I began to think through this. So when I started my PhD at the University of Pittsburgh, I said, I want to really understand why, those things were so. And then why was it that when I was working with the white families, a lot of the kids, they live in two families, rural suburban communities. But then in Philly, most of the black kids, sometimes you have the grandma or sometimes the mom, and it didn't settle well with me. And so at my PhD program, I began to get into the literature, and then that was how I recognized that the context of this is slavery, is racism, and the structure of it. But the other thing that I think was profound to me was that at the same time that I began to do that, I started going to black church, an all African American church. And as a children and youth minister, when these children will come to church or youth, and I'll ask them after church, I said, what's your prayer point? And they will say, pray for my mom, pray for my aunt, pray for my uncle. So I began to question. I said, wow, these kids are thinking just like I think about my uncles, my brothers, and my sisters. So how is it that from this stage to when they become adolescents, it's different? You see this. So that really, I think at the same time strengthened my motivation and the work that I was trying to understand about the black community. And so with my curiosity at the time and the real experience that I was having in the black community, then I found out about slavery, and I realized how even Africa was so, like Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal. The sub-Saharan African countries were instrumental, and Ghana in particular because of the slave dungeons, and I think the question that I asked myself was, if slavery didn't happen, what was the probability that the next black person that I meet here
Mm-hmm.
could have been my aunt, my uncle, my brother, or even my mom. And if I didn't know that probability, but I felt like if that was the issue, how will I treat them? Okay, so that was where I think it was like some kind of a scale just drop off my eyes, and then I began to see, wow, I have been. I think even I was carrying a trauma that is from the legacy of slavery and colonialism, but it was in a form that came through education. So mentally, you will not think that I have what traditional diagnosis that people would think about.
Mm-hmm.
But I think my worldview was distorted, and I realized this is something. So the more I delved into the story, I realized this is deep, and how it was. So that actually shaped my trajectory. So I began to say, okay, I think I would want to focus my work on race and think about these histories, and then look at Africa and even our education system and how black kids are also being educated here, because that's where I began to do racial socialization, racial identity, and those kinds of stuff. And so that got me into going into the history to see how true are those experiences, the narrative about people of the African descent, how true are they? And so the history provided me a very important context to get the truth as a way to help provide a counter narrative to the stereotypes and all of the isms and the thing that I think is flying around like a cancer. Yeah.
Anyway, I have read so much about your work, and you have done tremendous work in those areas of studies. But one actually caught my interest differently, and that is the research that you are currently working on, which is immigrant youth identity. And what number one, what informed that? I mean, how did you conceive that as a need among the African immigrant community?
I think that came out from a discussion. I know we had a couple of discussions, but from my own experience, because when I came here and I realized, granted, I was educated to think that colonialism benefited me. In Ghana, even up to now, I think we still have it. We talk about colonialism in terms of advantages and disadvantages. And so most Africans, by the time we immigrate into this country, our conception is that opportunity, wealth, success, and everything reside with white people. And that is a trauma from the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism, and it's still there. So because of that, when we come here, just like me, when I came here, up until the time that I started my PhD at the University of Pittsburgh, for 5 years, I want to go to African American communities because of all those misunderstandings and the stereotypes I had about them. And it wasn't something that I had, it had become like so ingrained. And I didn't realize how much that deep was. And so I look at myself at the time, if I had kids, I would have taught them the same way. Not to associate with these folks here, because I came here for opportunity.
That's right.
And from what I have made to think those opportunities reside with white people, so I need to gravitate towards white people in order to access those opportunities and to live that dream. So I've had a lot of recent African immigrants, some of them like my age, some older, and sometimes it becomes a heated argument because people have all kinds of stereotype, cultural misunderstanding about African Americans. But we African Americans too have, because of some of the same thing, also have been misinformed a lot about Africans. And so this idea is something that African immigrant come here to take up the opportunity and all of the other kinds of stuff. And then the African immigrant, we also don't know much about. Oftentimes when we come here, particularly some of us who come here to go to school, we get scholarship and we get some of the things. Most of us come in and we go to elite universities. And those universities recruit us as a way to make up for the diversity. But those kinds of the things, actually, African Americans are supposed to be the direct beneficiaries.
Okay.
Because those things are supposed to right the wrongs of how slaves, enslaved Africans built universities and this society. But they will go and recruit African immigrants who we are already colonized. And so we come here and we go by those terms. But then even we don't realize that those opportunities are actually at the backbone of the civil rights movement, which was championed and is still being led by African Americans.
That's right.
So if we understand that, I think that when we come here, it will be an important, I think, context for us to be united and even appreciate African Americans and not to think about running away from them. And then if the African Americans also, if they were to understand how Africans are living with the legacy of that trauma, that even the colonial mentality and everything, I think like we can see the point where we all can see a place to that can provide a context to build solidarity, to think about dealing with this issue. So it's as a result of all of this that I began to think about what I really want to know, how African immigrants are talking to their children about some of these contexts, and because it's going to be key moving forward, because we have our kids here who are growing up here, but if they don't understand the context, they will still take the colonial mentality.
That's right.
And they will be disconnected. And then the other side of it, because this study is African children who are growing up in African and Asian immigrant family, household. The reason is that, particularly having the Asian with that, is that across the board in this country, African immigrants are by far the most highly educated folks. Okay? The next group is Asian. Okay? So then we have Asian children described as model minority because of their achievement. African immigrant children also achieve, they do well, but they also share some of the same racialized experiences that African Americans go through. So the reason for this study is to understand this narrative, because when you are back there, we were told this place is like so great, the dream to come for the opportunity.
That's right.
But that was not a full story, and so this study is to really help us to understand what these children, the messages that they are getting, both at home and at school, and how those messages are shaping their identity in terms of who they are transnationally, and then in terms of their relationship with other racial groups, but particularly their relationship from the identity standpoint and how that connect even with African Americans here. Because it's supposed to, the idea is to be able to get an understanding of what these dynamics look like and the potential to begin to think about what can we do with the next generation to begin to correct some of these cultural misunderstandings that we have about one another, and in turn, I think provide the opportunity to engage in more social justice oriented leadership that actually make changes that do not contribute to perpetuating the structural nature of racism that impact us here and also impact the continent.
Let's go straight to Black History Month. What are the narratives behind Black History Month?
Well, so the from because of some of the work that I do, and part of when I do the racial socialization, critical component of that is the history piece. And so that brings in with the issue with the Black History Month. Um, what it actually began in 1915 by um, Carter G. Woodson. So Carter G. Woodson, he wrote this book, The Miseducation of the Blacks. Um, I think one of his, quote from that book that I really enjoyed, that he said, if you can control the mind of a person, you really don't need to do anything about their behavior. They will just do what you want. And he talks about the liberatory power of truth when it's grounded in the history. So, but he um, um, is the one that we can trace when we think about the Black History Month. And in 1915, he was at the University of Chicago, and then there was this celebration in Washington, D.C. And what happened was that they were doing an exhibition, about I think 3 weeks exhibition, showing the progress that Black people have made, after all the struggles and the things after the Emancipation Proclamation. So he went to Washington D.C. At this exhibition center, and then he is reported to have observed that Black people showed up for the exhibition. That was, I think, between 6,000 to 12,000 Black people who were there observing that. So he was fascinated by the turnout, and so right before he left, he began met with a few friends, colleagues, and to begin to think about Black History Month. And the idea was really about to form a research organization that will document the life of Black people at the time. It was the Negro life, and then provide that information, provide interpretation and knowledge to the community. And also that was supposed to be able to be used to really tell the story about the complexities of the Black experience. Okay. So it wasn't just necessarily only their achievement, but the achievement in the context of all of the nuances around, the slavery, around the different forms that racism has been evolving. You think about slavery, the new Jim Crow, all of those, COVID leasing, and now we have all this, environmental injustice, mass incarceration. So he formed this association. So by September of 1915, they made this formalized organization to do this. But I think they brought it in February to coincide with some celebration of the birthdays of Lincoln, President Abraham Lincoln, and then Frederick Douglass, whose birthdays are all in February. So they chose February to do that. But the original intent, from what I've read, even from the book on the miseducation of the Black children, is to really provide that context to the Black community and even the world in general, to miscorrect these cultural misunderstandings, and also to help Black children to know what they have and what they are endowed with. What it's kind of like provide that to show the model of who, as a Black people or persons of the African descent, what they are endowed with and the contribution that they have made. But it's to understand that legacy and also see where the journey is and what contribution that the next generation can also make to build on the legacy. So it's not, for me, on that understanding, I don't see this as just a ritualistic kinds of things. Because he conceived it at that point, but it's sometimes I look at this and I say, like, at this point, every day we interact with achievement and the experiences of Black people.
That's right.
Throughout the world. So to just have only 1 month to remember that itself, it's something that I think, I mean, it's another discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, what that means. And so I see this, I think, in the current way that it is being done. There are a couple of things that I have about that. I like the fact, because of what I do, when you think about this cultural, racial socialization and the identity, when people have a clear encounter with the history, a balanced story of the issue, it has a very transformative power, both psychologically, spiritually, culturally, and intellectually.
Okay.
And in that flows into other dimensions of life.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I want us to compare the severity of the sufferings, the agony, and the trauma that Africans passed through during the transatlantic slave trade, and the amount of freedom that we can say we experience or they experience since the end of slave trade. How would you rate that amount of victory if you put them side by side?
So, like for me, with the kind of the way that I see this, I will not necessarily compare them. I look at it from evolutionary standpoint.
Okay.
So because this process has not ended, it has been evolving. So whereas in the past it was, I mean, more overt and more, I think, sometimes the impact you can see instantaneously, like the way we see, when we see the way the police encounter with Black folks. The only reason why we see that sometimes it looks like it's really traumatizing and stuff is that because of the means by which that happens, the power of the gun, makes it happen so quick. Okay. But so that still, resemble the same old fashioned that it was. But now it happens, in the education sector, in the health, and in all the other areas, but in different forms.
Okay.
So you have scholars like Michelle Alexander in her book on the mass incarceration, the color blindness in the age of not the new Jim Crow, mass incarceration in the age of color blindness. She talks about this, that the more things are purportedly said they have changed, the more they remain the same.
The same.
And in Ibrahim Kendi, in his book, he wrote this stamped from the beginning. When we think of, say, there have been some progress, you also see the relentless progress of the same structural processes, out of which we got structural slavery that happened. So on that note, yeah, there have been some changes and stuff. We don't have, for instance, today we don't have like overt kinds of the slavery where the children of Black women were like taken into the plantations and other things. But when you think about the school to prison pipeline, that the school in some form has replaced the role that the system used Black women for, to get access to masses of Black bodies and subject them to the plantation economy. Now the school to prison pipeline funnels a lot of Black kids into the criminal justice system. And like the way Michelle Alexander said, as soon as you are labeled a felon, all of the old things that were supposedly left behind becomes legally available. And so when Black folks have, felony record, it's difficult to get a job in this country. It's difficult to rent. It's difficult to, and they have all these kinds of debt that they have to pay. So it not only keep them immobilized, economically, it does so psychologically, spiritually, in all the dimensions of life. It destroys family. So when you think of just that alone, you see the pattern is a continuity.
Continuity.
So I wouldn't, think about, I think, comparing them to that. But yeah, the mode has changed, but the process of it,
It still
I think
continues.
you have that, and because it is building into the very foundation of the society.
Well, thank you. So somebody said that he doesn't celebrate Black History Month because he sees it as a polite way, of reminding him of the stereotype associated with the color of his skin. Do you agree with that view?
So, in some respect, I will agree with the person, because I think, yes, sometimes the way, the ritualistic nature that the Black History Month is taken, it's like it's almost losing what it's supposed to be, you know. And so, for instance, when you think about the trauma that most people have been through, and so the some of these things that we are doing, we are celebrating, it's like almost kind of Black people are proving to white people that they exist and they are this, and that sometimes even still position white people somewhere as if they are the owners, they are the boss. And so when you do that, sometimes you are reenacting some of the trauma that are associated with the adaptive processes that most the enslaved people utilize, to survive in the time. And then on the part of, like, for even on the part of, I think, the society in general, which include both Black and white and everybody, I think this kind of the thing, we're supposed to have a deeper reflection of this, and to really know that, well, if this is the story, I think what we have made to believe is not. So that is should be able to help us to deconstruct what we have known and how we still treat them. So after all this month is over, we have teachers showing all of these things, but people don't even connect this to the children, and they don't connect it well to even meaningfully to what they believe. And so just do this as an activity, but don't do anything about the structures and the system and the cultural narrative that sustain this. So if you keep celebrating that without a better understanding of what it means, then of course it reminds you about what I think the system and this invention of a group of people called white. And it is that invention, as a result of that invention, it's a fatal invention. That invention brought the idea Black, because when the folks came here in Africa, even before that, they knew themselves by their various tribes. They didn't call themselves they're Black. People come here the first time they are met with, you are Black, and all of those kinds of stuff. And the thing is this, the Black, saying Black, it's not our invention. It is racialized invention. And for me, one of the things that I think it's important is that, names are powerful. I think as Africans, we name something by the experience we have around it. So the name of a thing is a thing. And so when you name something and you utilize the name, you are not just speaking words, you are actually participating in that process. So when race, whiteness was invented, and they describe it that if you're white, by your design of being a white, you are supposed to behave this way. This was not any natural process. It is a man-made invention that says that, right from ever since whiteness became law in 1680, right after the Bacon Rebellion in 1676, when white European landholding elite, they didn't want to, cede power and share the collective resources, but one recognized that the ability of enslaved, at that time they were not that enslaved, they were indentured Africans together with poor European descent and Native Americans were living together. They didn't see any difference among themselves. Now these folks began to say that in order for us to control and sustain our power, we have to do this divide and conquer strategy. And so they came up with this invention. So if you're white, you are ordained to think this way, behave this way, act this way. And on that account, this is the protection you get. Okay? And so it right away divided people who were living together and recognized their common oppression, their shared humanity. And so that also came in black. So if you are black, then and someone is white, then they say black is inferior, is this. And so if you're white, you are supposed to go by this code and treat black that way.
That way.
And so if we are even now celebrating this and we don't go deep into the history and we just mention it, we are actually participating in the same process. We are engaging in that racial affair where those white people did that and placed that label on us.
But then, Prof, I agree with you. But let's look at it this way. Okay, look at the mindset of an average African, about the superiority that an average white man has on them, the kind of influence that they celebrate on the white folks. So do you think it is the fault of the white to think that they are superior to the black, when the mindset of the black themselves, is that, okay, anything that is white? Because back in Africa, if you put two species of dog on front, and you say this one is from London, for instance, and this one is the local dog, I mean, you will rate the one that is from, even though you can't even hunt anything.
Yeah.
You understand? You say, oh, he's so do you say that the white is actually wrong to think superior when the black themselves are thinking inferior?
So, and this is where again, like some of these issues, like talking about black life, black history, black accomplishment, are important, but if it is not done with the right understanding, with the right ingredient, it will go off. And so, to your point, what we're seeing is trauma in action. It's the idea, because once people came out with this ideology, and we think about this thing, we know when we think about white, pink, somebody with that pink skin color, it's not white. It's completely far from white, but we have accepted it and we play the term. But that was the thing, that we are imposing this on you. You accept to become white. It comes with this, and if you don't accept that and you want to be this way, black comes with these forms of treatment. So Du Bois called this, the I think for most poor white, it's amazing, because I've seen the psychological wages of whiteness. They don't have anything to show for it, but they still maintain this narcissistic thinking that they are better off than non-white folks. So that even is a trauma. And then you have white folks who are also doing well. They think that because they have been made to think that what keeps them in life and everything is having access to these things, that by agreeing to become white, they were promised these things. So they see those things as their gods, those material possessions and everything. And so they think that if they should lose them or share with other people, they are lost out of life. That's trauma. When you have people socialize them to think that these things are what sustain them. And so, anytime you think about changes, you have a lot of white have this anxiety because they think they are going to lose out. And then on the part of the Africans, I will not say that whether Africans on the continent or Africans in the diaspora or African Americans here actually participate in that. What we see is trauma in action. And the reason is because why some of this history is important is because we have not engaged in trauma construction to see the magnitude of this impact and how it continues to shape our life. So, for instance, most of the things that happened during the slavery, for instance, a lot of the behaviors were adaptive. Sometimes, because if white enslaver has decreed that you, as an African person of the African descent, you are stupid. You are supposed to act that way, because if you act contrarily and you are found, it's considered you are rebelling. So you are resisting against their authority, and that comes with punishment. So sometimes, depending on how people want it, you have children growing up and they were so smart. They will, playing with white children in games and things. They will beat the white kids, but then white parent will come and enforce it that the black kids didn't have to show that side because whiteness has ordained that white children are superior. That's not. And so sometimes black children will downplay their intelligence during slavery just to adapt, but it wasn't something. But why the reason why like some of these histories are important and shouldn't be only for a month is that it is important to connect with some of these wounds that we still carry, so that we can begin to disengage and foster the process of healing that will allow us to live the authentic self. But that's not what is being done, because when we talk about just this, you have to talk about the achievement within its authentic context.
Okay. Well, so let's talk about Black History Month versus the African immigrants here. Do they align with the virtues of that celebration?
I think I look at it even for me, like the first 5 years of me coming in here, because already when I was coming, I was made to think that I am coming into the land of opportunity, and those opportunities reside within the white domain. So when I come here, it's almost like you come and the white, particularly a white man, is sitting down with the leg crossed. It's like, if you want to be successful, climb up to where I am. Okay? And so most of us, we come and we want to climb, because coming back from over there, most of us, by our education, our religious activities and other things, have already been conditioned by colonial mentality. Colonialism wasn't just an event. It invaded the metaphysical space of the Africans, and it's still the same coloniality of being, which is where the forms, the kinds of the knowledge, the way we interpret the reality, the world, and the experiences is more powerful, and it's so insidious. And so many of us come here, we have already accepted the superiority of the white person in different form and think that what we want exists with them. So you have most of us, even in church, people will pray and people are praying, God should let a helper come, and oftentimes they are thinking of a white person to come and help them. But we don't recognize that a lot of the things that most white people are sitting on actually are from us, Africans, African Americans, or Africans, because African Americans, their generation came from here. Our natural resources, Africa has contributed tremendously, both natural resources, human resources, entertainment in different ways. But because of that colonized mindset, we come here And our focus is that we are coming to look for opportunity. Because we don't tell the history back home. We don't know that all of the things that we are suffering are the legacies. How our colonial system, our government, we talk about corruption. Our people have been made to think that all the time what success look like is if we can act like we are white people. Frank Fanon has this book called Black and White Mask. And you look at how colonial era Africans, were so envious of the life of white because of their depravity, but it was the structure. And Fanon has this other book too, that the wretched of the earth. It's so phenomenal how colonial mentality, and that also is coming off of the transatlantic slave trade that was about 250 years. So that thing really shifted our African mindset to see wealth, prestige, success, and everything as something that is inherent in white people, Europeans, than us. And so our idea, that thing has passed on generationally to us. So that is where we see the African immigrant or Africans on the continent. We are traumatized by these processes, but because we don't talk about it, we think that trauma is only when people have, depression and all this, anxieties and stuff. But culturally, our ways of life and our ways of thinking how to make money, how to generate wealth, and everything have been distorted from one of being association with white people, and like through that we get access, but we don't think that those are all trauma in action, and it's coming out of those legacies of the transatlantic slave trade, where Europeans will form alliance with local tribal leaders and supply them guns and other things and keep us divided, so that through that people can capture their own, whether by force or deceptions or all kinds of stuff. And so we come here and we still carry that trauma. So oftentimes only few of us that when we come to that realization begin to focus on some of these things. Like people like Kwame Nkrumah, Nnamdi Azikiwe, those people, when they came here and they saw the experience, that's why when they came back home, they wanted drastic change. But by then, many of us who also, because by virtue of their families or their grandparent or parent alliance with white people, now gain access to go to European universities, came back with this colonial mentality, were also resisting those kinds of the things. And that's what we're still experiencing today.
I see. I have, I'm trying to process your explanation. And I got some follow-up questions that I don't know if time would permit us to go over them. Now, would you blame, with the situation of things in Africa today, would you blame any young, promising, vibrant youth who for deciding to travel abroad for greener pasture, with the situation of things today in Africa?
I will not blame. I won't even talk about the blame issue. I think the issue for me is that we need a collective healing, because our systems and all that we operate on in Africa, we call ourselves, independence today. We are not independent. Our government and staff clearly don't have local legitimacy. That's why it's oftentimes it's World Bank, it's IMF, it's international organization that do rating for us to think about, our GDP is this way, so we are this, we are that, but it doesn't reflect in the lives of our people. And it's because our structures of governance and everything we inherited a system that was designed by Europeans with European interests. And so if you didn't design something and you come to inherit it, it will function the same way. Like this chair that I'm sitting on here. You're sitting on this chair. The person who designed the chair made it that when you sit on this, it should hold you.
That's right.
So when you sit on this chair, and the person doesn't have to come and stand here and say the chair should do what it's supposed to do. It will function exactly. So even though geopolitically we don't have, white people sitting on our seat of government, but the structures that our people are now occupying were designed and instituted by them. So once they come to sit in, it orients their thinking and everything. Just like when they were there, you have in the work that I do in Ghana on the slave dungeons, I use the architectural design to talk about structural racism. So those on top, they don't care about what the masses were suffering at the slave dungeons there. So it's the same way you have our leaders are in those seats, and all that they think, it's not so much about the people. They're thinking about buying houses in Western countries, savings, and all of these other kinds of stuff. And because when you occupy those structures, we didn't dismantle them, we inherited them. And because it wasn't designed for us with our interest in, it is still serving the same thing. So now it also, that trauma get in, and our young people are seeing, because even our schools, when you go into our universities these days, most of our theories, our books are all Western oriented. So we orient them and socialize them to think that for them, there isn't so much good about them. And so traveling here is what will make them. I mean, that's what all of us thought. That's what brought me. I was thinking that's the same thing. And that's why even, this study that we're doing. And I think now with this understanding that I have, that's why I have this project in Ghana, critical dialogue around the transatlantic slave trade with young adults about what this edifice means and how to foster the sense of healing, on multiple levels. Because the system there destroyed the nature of human relationship that we had. Because by forming alliances with local tribal leaders and using that means to capture others, it destroyed our ability to be united for state formation and to think about paying our own tax system, where we thought of how to generate money became one of tricks, fraud, and all kinds of stuff. And that is still what is going on today. We think about corruptions and all of these kinds of stuff. It's those are trauma in action.
Well, I understand. And this is where somebody may want to ask. We have some African countries that are 60 years old as a sovereign nation, you understand? And then we continue blaming the people that have come to colonize you 60 years ago. So why do we always blame our failure on other people? And the people that we blame our failure on are the people that we actually run to when we get in, when we need help. So why can we not, as a people of Africa, sit down to design our life ourselves? Why do we have to rely on help from foreign land and all that?
And that's where, again, the history, we can never do until healing has occurred. We are wounded people, economically, culturally, spiritually, and stuff. So the world in general, because of some of all of these fatal inventions around whiteness, but the Africans in particular, all of us, we have a very distorted sense of reality because of the knowledge forms that we have, been socialized into. The way, westernized thinking has shaped us. And so if we can do that, it's not so much about, the blaming them, but what we are talking about is when people are wounded. You think about this. You are carrying a wound. You don't have your full capacity. So what we have is that a lot of our self-awareness, what makes us who we are, that allow us to bring all of our capacities to bear, we are disengaged from it. So we need healing that will facilitate restoration of ourselves, who we are, what we have within us, and our resources. But that cannot happen until we engage in this process of healing. And we can do that if we don't talk about this history. But unfortunately, our back home, we think that even slavery is not something that is of importance to us because it was in the past. I remember one time we were with some student from Africana Studies in Ghana, and we had a professor who was talking with them, and this man was like, slavery is an obsolete phenomenon. And the student asked him, do you know anything about mass incarceration? This were African American college students. They were so upset. So they ended up actually ending the cutting of the conversation. That's part of that. And so here you have this person talking about this thing is as an obsolete phenomenon, but we don't see how it has shaped our thinking of how to make money, how to make wealth, how to relate with one another, and how it destroyed our resources, and at the same time they continue to do. So the idea that we all the time run to them, because that's how it was designed. And this is where I think we talk. So we don't say that we have independence 60 or whatever years ago. We have not really have any independence. It's just on the outward. And like Kwame Nkrumah said this in his book Neocolonialism. He described it so well. He said that we have this outward trappings of post-colonial society, thinking that we are a sovereign nation, but we have the inner workings of those colonial legacies, colonial processes that have still kept us. And what that has done is it has culturally dislocated us. And Ngugi Thiong'o actually put this so well in his book, Something Torn, The Renaissance, Something Torn, Something Born. He described even the difference between Africans and the Africans in the diaspora. He described that the Africans in the diaspora, like African Americans and all those across that, they were cut off from their cultural root. And so for them, they've experienced cultural side, which is a death of their a lot of the things that actually will ground them in their identity. But for us, because of this same thing and the colonial legacy, we've experienced cultural starvation. And so if until we nourish them, and we can nourish them until we have done the healing process where we are healed, so that we begin to engage our own knowledge system and think about things that connect to us. Because, for instance, the knowledge base with which you design a developmental project is key to the outcome that you're going to get.
That's correct.
So if the knowledge system, the epistemological framework in which our universities, our systems are built on, are really rooted in westernized notions, which are designed to serve their interests and not our interests, it doesn't matter who is sitting on the seat, who is doing whatever it is, it will always end up producing an outcome that doesn't serve us. And so now we need to tackle this not only from monetary angle, the physical angle, but we also have to tackle this as we deal with the healing. We have to tackle the epistemic frame, the epistemic injustice that we are oriented to in education, the churches, and some of the cultural norms that we use. They are not even our culture. They are part of the trauma that we have inherited from this invention, and that allows slavery to happen. And so we come here, even here, that's why we have all this. This country has races, black, white, Asian, all of those things. There's the same continuity of that same division, because racism thrive, the key ingredient that sustains racism is division. It's division.
Well, I will want to thank you so much for being our guest on this program today. Before I let you go, what do you think the African people have to do to kind of disengage their mindset from this trauma, this natural trauma that daily follows them all the time in their reasoning, their thinking?
I think we have to again come to the point to realize that we have built on a dehumanized system, an act that has dehumanized us, and then our relationships that we have with ourselves and with one another are also, on the base of this dehumanized process. So it's wounds that are all the time in action. And then we have built structures and systems that sustain this dehumanization thing. So if we can do anything, for us to really well position, we can't ignore the question of the history about transatlantic slavery and the slavery piece. Now, the issue is this. Once we recognize that we have a sickening society, that will help us. When you think about, God, we tend to do a lot of things, but see, God uses the word, people who understand this, the gift of the word of knowledge. The gift of the word of knowledge is the way that the Spirit of God unveils truth to you that are historical, that also are present. So through the gift of the word of knowledge, you can see sometimes people who operate, when you operate in that gift, you can see someone who is an adult now, but you can see them in their childhood era, what occurred to them and how that has shaped their adult life. That can provide a way to begin to think of solution. Now, moving from even spiritual, so if God himself relies on history to facilitate some healing and other things, we know this. I think medically, any of us, you go to hospital, we are okay. We see this as normal to provide all of the historical information we can have about our genealogy. Psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers rely on history to understand patterns in order to be able to facilitate healing and transformation. We do. But when it comes to us as a collective, thinking that we live in a sickening society, we don't want to engage the history upon which these wounds are established. That will help provide us a way to reimagine and begin to foster a healing journey that then will set us on a different path. And so it's all because we are caught up in this. So I think for me, and that is actually for one of the reasons why the work that I do now, because when I came to realize how I was traumatized by the colonial legacy and how that has shifted the cultural lens with which I look at things, I'm still on the journey, engaged in more the colonial processes and doing things. And so when I talk with people, I teach students, I think this understanding even moved this issue from the idea that this is black, white, this is this. Everybody, and particularly in this country, whether white or whoever, we are traumatized by the invention, a man-made invention that said that if you look like this or that, you are called white, you are called black, and then this is the kind of the thinking that you should have. And they forced this, indoctrinated this through school, through churches, through everything, and now it has become so ingrained. And so if we're going to be able to do anything, we have to go back to the beginnings where these things started and know how we can break from it. There are some things that we can take and that can help us to thrive, but we can't fully discover these things without going back to the history.
Well, it's been a wonderful session with you. I want to thank you so much for being our guest on the program. It's been a highly revealing session. And viewers, This is where we'll be drawing curtains on this edition of the program, African Voices Abroad. Next time when I bring you yet another episode of this same program, remain your host, Larry Omotosho.